Hi, good evening, everybody, and it's very, very nice to be here. I'm actually really happy to be here with you tonight. What I will be speaking about tonight is a combination of, I've done a bit of studying, as you've heard, but my own experience of depression and bipolar and how it impacted me, my family life, how, we're still coping with it. This is an ongoing situation. If you're living with and loving somebody with bipolar or depression, you're actually supporting somebody who is hurting. But also, and that's why I choose this picture, there's a ripple effect. It ripples out from the centre. And the person who has the diagnosis or whatever can sometimes feel very responsible for it. But what we're going to look at is how to look at it as a unit. How does a family, a relationship, as a unit, try to deal with these challenges? And we will focus on, as I said, the challenges faced by the people doing the caring, doing the supporting. All I can say is without my husband, hopefully he'll make it in this evening, of 27 years, I would not be here. I would not be here. The times I've sat in front of the doctors weeping, the times I've been to counsellors, psychotherapists, weeping, crying my eyes out because I couldn't make sense of what was happening to me. Okay? That helped me along the way. But also it was the unrelenting support. He was no angel. We've had our rough times. It has impacted the marriage at times. But we made it some way through and we're still kind of doing it. I'm not an expert. I don't have all the answers. All I can offer is my own experience, plus that I was due to becoming very well on lithium. I decided to go back and study the subject. So that's what we're looking at today, okay? And the reason for my image is the ripple effect. And that's a bit about me. I was diagnosed with bipolar at the age of, I can't remember now, at 36. So I had my first pregnancy at that stage. It was after my second pregnancy. So it's often a long road for both parties to find out what the hell is going on. Okay? So I've lived with it from that time. I now take lithium and I take an antidepressant, and touch wood, I'm doing okay so far. I have my moments. This isn't always the way I'm like, I can tell you. Okay? There are times when I just want to stay in bed and shut the windows, so it's not just happening to you. Sometimes the people think it's only happening to me. It's not. Okay. 10 days ago, if you'd asked me if I was able to stand here and give this talk, I would have said no way. There had been a mix-up with my lithium. I was very unwell. So we're all hitting those bumps along the way to mental health. Okay? So I said, that's a little bit about me. I have two daughters. One is 25. She's now in China at the moment. And I have an 18-year-old daughter as well. And they don't even know how to spell the word stigma. Okay, they've grown up with it. So hopefully that's the next generation coming on. There's a lot of talk about what is depression and what's it about. You can say all the terms and the medical terms, but let's just really look at it. Persistent, sad, anxious, empty feeling. It's like going around with an empty swing in your stomach. Okay? And this is for the carers to possibly get a feeling for what's going on with your loved one. The hopelessness, the pessimism, the guilt, the worthlessness and the helplessness. And it's the worthlessness that, for me personally and for some of my clients, is the hardest thing to deal with. You feel you're not worth anything. Okay? You have loss of interest in your hobbies, you've loss of interest in sexual relations, and that trips off the tongue, but that's very hard for any marriage, any relationship. That sort of intimacy is taken away. You have difficulties with concentration. You have difficulties with putting money into the parking machine because everything seems too much. Okay? You have problems with your sleep. You're either sleeping too much or you have broken sleep, or I know I had a lot of early wakening. You start waking at 3:30, 4, 4:30. So sleep was broken. You've changes in your appetite. In my case, of course, it was I overate. I didn't get the undereat, I overate. And there is physical symptoms with this. The psychomotor retardation, as it's called, You know, you feel slower, you feel heavier. I had aches and pains in places that I didn't even know I could have aches and pains. And all the time the questioning, what the hell is going on with me? Okay? And the suicide. And the suicidal ideation and suicide are very heavy words. Suicidal ideation does not always mean that there's going to be a suicide. It's the ideation. It's a thinking process. The person is thinking about it. It's often telling you, I'm at the end of the road of my coping mechanisms. What I would say to people, live in the moment. Take the person every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. That's the way you do it. Until the point that you know you can't deal with this, then you ring your doctor or whoever. Don't try to go it alone. So it goes from suicidal ideation, and then, you know this person. You use your comp on. If it's sliding towards planning, more intent, straight away get help. And that, as a carer, is a main point, to get support. You know, if you had a child or somebody with cancer, you wouldn't expect to do the chemotherapy at home yourself, would you? Carers of people living with mental illness expect an awful lot from themselves. I think personally, it's still wrapped up in the stigma. You know, we keep it at home, we deal with it. And, you know, somebody like Aware is there. I cannot emphasize enough. Access the help, the information provided by Aware. It's excellent, and I'm not just saying that. It's there. You don't need to sit in panic. Reach out. That's very, very important. Aware, Shine, whatever, but these organisations are there to assist, okay? Now, depression happens in 4 areas. How the person feels, okay? So just imagine, for a second, either you are a person who has experienced depression or you're caring for somebody with depression. Just imagine if you felt all these emotions, how would it make you feel? Sadness, helplessness, guilt, moodiness, anger, loss of interest. So that's how you're feeling. Before you do anything else, you open your eyes in the morning and that's the set you're given, their feelings. How are you thinking? You can't concentrate. You can't make decisions, which I found very hard. The ability to make decisions is impaired. You forget things. Your self-esteem is low, and then, you know, you might be thinking of self-harm or even go as far as delusions. Remember, mental illness happens on a continuum. It starts with low mood and goes progressively towards the more severe. Okay? It's on a continuum. How does this person behave? They withdraw. I'm, taken to the bed, blankets over the head. That's the behaviour, you withdraw. Some turn to substance abuse, alcohol, whatever. It's just to take away these feelings. Then missing out on work or school, and again, the very worrisome self-harm. Again, something like self-harm, and that you contact your GP. It is not something you can take on yourself, and don't expect yourself to. And physically, the person will have no energy, aches and pains, weight loss, weight gain, which affects your self-esteem as well. So can you imagine, for those of you who don't have mental illness or anything like that, imagine if you got up in the morning feeling like that. That's before you put on the kettle. So just to give you an idea, as a carer, if your loved one is not responsive or if they can be a bit agitated, this is what's going on. And not all depression is a sad depression. You can have what they call an agitated depression, where the person becomes quite agitated. So do you think that would be a hard way to start the day? Very difficult. And I'm not talking about sympathy. I'm talking about empathy. Stand in their shoes. The objective being to help you as the carer to understand what's going on. Turning around and saying, you're not great today, doesn't help. Saying, and over asking how a person's doing. They might say to you, isn't it bloody obvious how I'm feeling? Okay. I notice I notice that things are a little bit different today. Just try something that way, okay? Now, these are some of the descriptions I have come across from some of my own clients. I haven't been practicing very long, but the first one, like being in a dark well. There's no way out, okay? Like being in an empty, dark room. Very isolating. Third one is my own description, like walking through heavy grease with a weight on your shoulders. That not only tells you the feelings, but also the physical feeling of being heavy. Being heavy, like you can walk through grease, that's heavy enough, and then put a weight on your shoulders. So just for those of us who support or are being supported by, this is what people are feeling. And then you have people who feel they kind of withdraw. They feel disconnected from society. It's like a pane of glass between them and the world. Or like having no feelings left, numbness. There's nothing. So you get up in the morning and you feel nothing. And somebody says, do you want a cup of tea? How are you doing? How's the farm? You can barely get the words out. Okay? And also, the person has feelings of loss of energy, loss of interest in life. And I'm sure none of this is completely new for anybody here who lives with somebody with mental illness. Self-esteem and sense of self is gone. It will come back with the proper care, the proper therapy. But at that time, that's how the feelings are, okay? The feeling of not participating in life, and that's the one that used to really get me. I have the balcony in my house, and I used to sit in it, and I used to look out, and I'd say, I can't get out there. I can't, because I know once I leave the door, I'll start shaking. Okay? So that's another feeling. And feeling anxious or feeling depressed, and the reason I chose this was the feeling of anxiety, to help us all understand, is when you're actually hanging onto the cliff. You're actually hanging for dear life. That's the anxiety. But the depression is when you're down there, you've fallen. Okay, so just to help, I found that helped me in the difference between anxiety and depression. I always say anxiety is at least still a more active state. You still want to keep going. Hit the bottom, where do you go then? This is a very important point, my next slide. The person and the illness. I think that the confusing thing and the challenging thing is a person living with the challenge of mental illness, it affects their personality. It affects their being. It affects who they are. So sometimes it's very hard to divide where the illness starts and ends and where the person starts and ends. So that can be very difficult. You know, I remember screaming back at my husband, "You just think I'm an illness?" And he said, "Well, yeah, at the moment." But always remember there's a person behind that pain. There's a person there. And not to lose sight of that. You know, we don't say, "Oh, here's my husband, high blood pressure." And I'm being, you know, we would never think of saying that. We would never say, "I am cancer." But somehow we seem to carry mental illness like a sign in front of us. A sign we all want to hide, by the way, and we want nobody to see. So that's the funny thing about it. You know, don't forget the person. And I think if there's anything I would say to carers, and one thing that my husband had to learn is I was still there behind all the crazy, behind all the walking up and down for 12 hours, behind all the crying. I was still there. That's very important to understand as a carer. It's a big ask, but it's important. And just a quick look at how a person living with depression might feel, okay? And it's called the cognitive triad. It's triad 3. One of the bases of CBT, I'm sure you've heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I love it. Very common sense. I love it, okay? And the person, number one, they feel bad about themselves. I'm helpless, I'm inadequate. And then they feel bad about the future. Here. And then they feel bad about the world in general. So that's where the hopelessness comes from. What do you do as a carer when you are confronted with this? I would suggest, people living with mental illness and not made of paper say, well, are you really helpless now? Challenge a little bit. Are you really helpless? You've done really well in that. Now, don't forget that. Don't try to be the counsellor. That's from CBT. Check the reality of the statement. I'm using phrases I used to use all the time. Oh, I'll never make anything out of my life. I said, well, why did you say that then? I'm a bit confused. Instead of saying, well, no, you're not, no, you're really good, say, well, tell me, I'm a bit confused now that you're saying that you have a really good job and you do really well, so I'm confused as to why you're saying that. See, I'm getting it, people with mental illness, as you well know, ain't stupid. Gently challenge. That is what is the basis of depression, and it would be from Aaron Beck. But I know CBT, I think it's very common sense, And this is what I asked you to do before. All these descriptions of the person living with the illness. So just imagine, if you felt like the person in the previous slide, you would probably feel vulnerable, oversensitive, inadequate, and fearful, wouldn't you? So it's just to allow you for a couple of minutes to step into the shoes of the person who's feeling that way. The worst thing you can say to that person, come on, snap out of it. Come on now, the doctor said you'd be grand. It's very hard to snap out of that. And it's regardless of what your belief is as to where depression comes from. There's a biological, genetic, reactive, but it's the day-to-day living with it that I'm talking about. And we're only human, to say, oh, for God's sake, will you cop on? Sometimes that's actually, try to avoid it, would be my advice from my own experience. Okay? Imagine how this would affect you interact with others. So people living with the challenge of mental illness, difficult to interact with others because you hit out because you feel defensive, you withdraw because you're afraid. And both of these have their roots in chronic low self-esteem and ongoing negative self-talk. And that's the psycho blurb for when you're depressed, you are not walking around saying, gee, I'm grand. You know that conversation that goes on in your head? The one that nobody else hears? The negative self-talk? I'd never be able to do that. Oh, God, I'm not as good as them. Oh, we all do it. I did it today, walking in the door going, oh, God, I hope I get away with this one. Communication and an action plan. I cannot, again, from my own research, from my own experience, I cannot emphasize how important this is. Aware has a number of free life skills programs that are fantastic. They're free. And this is the thing you as the carer or the supporter access help for yourself. Inform yourself. If you go on the website as well, there's an actual sheet on being a carer as well, and there's some really practical stuff on it, real down-to-earth, accessible stuff to do. And on the Aware website, they have 3 sheets of how do you usually deal with this? What are the things you usually do? I found that really effective. So you find out what works, and you find out what doesn't work. Okay? Remembering at all times, you partner with your GP, your whatever mental health nurse. Don't try to do this on your own. You wouldn't take your child's tonsils out on your own. I know I'm being glib. You need the support. Okay? Communication is absolutely essential. Look at how you communicate. And we all do it, okay? And one client said to me, yeah, what do I do? And what struck me was the assertive I statement. Has anybody ever heard of that? It's common sense when you hear it, you know. You might say to the person, when you don't speak to me, I really feel shut out. So, you know, I'm here if you want to talk to me. But when you don't talk to me, I feel really shut out. And it stops me helping you. Instead of, why don't you talk to me? How am I supposed to know what's going on? We all get to the end of our tether. I do know. Okay? So that sort of idea, the assertive I statement. When you do X, the consequence of that is Y. Instead of, why don't you? We all do it. Will you just cop on? Yeah. When I start hearing my pronouns coming out of my mouth, I think, So try the assertive I statement. There's plenty on it on the web. And it's one of those easier things, you know. Just like we said about the person getting up in the morning. They feel awful. You know, how are you doing today? How are you doing today? Maybe just once. Just a cup of tea or something, you know. Remember that you have rights as well. That you have rights to your morning routine. That you have rights to living a life too. Can't be all about this person. At times it might be, but you can have depression for 40 years. Okay? The plan I'm talking about is quite simply, when your loved one is well, sit down and say, okay, it's really good being well, and this is what I did. So we have put a plan in place for when you're not feeling good. Because, you know, when you're not feeling good, I sometimes feel a little bit overawed. So will we just decide what steps we'll take? I've literally done it. So the first thing my husband just calls our GP, who's fantastic. We have a psychiatrist name. We have somebody, the kids are growing up now, but we had somebody there to mind the kids. It's as simple as that. Now, at the time that the plan was put in place, I wasn't too happy about it. But at the back of my mind, I kind of felt, well, yeah, at least we know. So it means the person supporting has a map of how to get through this crisis situation. And you just need a map. Again, I can't emphasize, with suicide, if you feel it's very strong, if the person is making plans, if you see a huge change in behaviour, a big up in behaviour sometimes, go with your gut and get help. This is about the ripple, and the ripple really draws people who are the carers into it, okay? And how it affects you. I think sometimes people supporting those with mental illness feel they have to be really good and never give out and never get fed up and be Florence Nightingale, you know? It's not true, you're only people too. As Gary Barlow said in his song, we're not invincible, we're only people. Okay? There's a thing called compassionate fatigue that can happen. Just get tired of being compassionate. And you get to the stage that there's no space left for you. If you're on a flight, they will say, mother with baby, the mother puts on the oxygen mask first. Is it because she's a meanie, horrible mammy? It allows her to look after the child. Take that attitude as well. You need to take care of yourself. And you have a right to feeling good. Just because your partner is unwell, you shouldn't feel guilty. You shouldn't feel bad about it. Oh, I can't go out now because he's not well. You can go out for 2.5 hours. You can go for a walk. You can go for a coffee. Because sometimes the person who is not feeling really good would like you to just feck off for a while and leave them alone, to be so blunt, you know. They're not made of paper. How would you feel if somebody was around you all the time asking you how you felt? You'd get annoyed, wouldn't you? 2 hours. Go to the cinema. If you feel concerned, have a friend or a family member just pop in and sit with the person, whoever. don't give up your life. Because one day, someday, you will need yourself. Or your partner will need you, and you won't have the resources. I've seen it happen with my husband. I've seen him sit down and go, having to take 2 weeks off work and go to bed after I was ill, because he had nothing left. As I said, I'm talking a lot of my own experience. You know, and he's a young 6'3" guy. You wouldn't expect. He said, "I have to go to bed. I'm too exhausted." Okay, try to watch for the exhaustion level. Okay. And it's okay to feel these feelings. You're a human being. It's okay to see that, feel confused. It's okay to feel this is a burden. It's okay to feel fed up. There would be something wrong if you didn't. And, if you tell yourself you don't feel like that, check how true it is. It's okay to feel those feelings. And there's one feeling that I found very strong, the sense of loss. The sense of loss for the relationship you thought you would have. The sense of loss as to this person has changed. And yeah, they have. And your marriage might change, but it would have changed anyway. But I can really understand that, grieving for my husband, I'm grieving for the marriage I thought we would have. But that's okay, that's normal. But unfortunately, you have to move towards acceptance. This is the way it is now. And after this, it won't be Ken and Barbie or whoever. Be a different and possibly a better marriage. Who knows? Now, what you can do, and looking at the more practical things, take time out. I cannot emphasize that so much. Sit down with your planner and plan 3 nights a week that you go out. I'm not saying going to nightclubs and on the razz till 5 o'clock in the morning. Go out, socialise, feed yourself. Sit down and plan it. Every week. Play bridge, whatever. Don't let go of your social connections. That's what feeds you. You have rights in this relationship. You have a right to remain you. So you have to take care of yourself. Eliminate the guilt. I don't know how many times my husband's way of coping was going kayaking, and I would be weeping, and he would just get into the car and go and kayak for 2 hours. He said, I had to do it. I just had to do it. And with the years, I've stopped shouting at him less about it. I'm usually quite depressed when I'm doing it, but take your space. Because if you don't, you will need yourself one day, and your partner or the person might need you. And the research I've done is indicating that there's high rates of depression in people caring for those with mental illness. So be very careful about that. Be aware. Feeling guilty is a waste of time. You do as humanly possible, but you sit down, you take out, you say, I'm going to go to bingo that night, I'm going to go to a movie that night, and I'm going to go out for 2 hours for coffee that day. You have to do that. You have to do that. If you're concerned about the person, ask a friend, colleague, whatever. Okay. Educate yourself. Again, and I'm not just harping on the aware side because it's an aware talk, but if you look at the aware lectures, underneath them there's references to reading material, and I hope I can put some reading material up afterwards. Go read the right stuff. If you go on a lot of websites, they'd have you packing your case and freaking out if you were to listen. Be very careful where you get your information. There's a lot of sensationalism. And of course in the media, I am not as interesting as the bipolar people in the media, I can tell you. Not at all. Understand what the person is going through. It's quite frustrating at times. And you will have a sense of loss. Where is this person? I found for me insight. Insight has saved my bacon. Insight being the fancy word for understand what's happening. I now know my pattern is November, December, January, iffy times for me. Don't take on anything too big. Literally. If I was invited to a wedding or something New Year's Eve, I wouldn't go. It's just not a good time for me. You know, the person if it's in that case, if it's bipolar or depression, they can be seasonal, they can have a pattern. Okay? A spotter, you know, you can be a spotter. What do I mean by that? Is saying to somebody, you know, I kind of noticed in the last couple of weeks you weren't sleeping well. You know? Kind of sending a message to that person, your moods are beginning to change. Inform them, and inform yourself, because my husband says once, I never make big decisions in January with me. Drives me mad that he says that, but it's true. You know, so there can be a pattern to it. Not only for you to be aware of, but for the person you're caring for to be aware of. This is shared insight, okay? Seek support. I cannot emphasize that any stronger, and I've talked enough about that. Share the burden. Share the burden. I've been asked about who should I tell and who should I not tell. Tell people you trust and who mean something to you. That would be my answer. You trust and who mean something to you. Otherwise, nobody... Look, I have another thing about people not telling and stigma, but we're going to need another couple of years for that to change. But tell those who mean something to you and mean something to your partner or whatever. You don't owe anybody an explanation anyway. You know? Have realistic expectations. And this is something I found hard myself to do, because I am limited by living with bipolar. I am. There's things I love to do that I can't do, and I found going to college so hard. Well, it could have been my advancing years as well. Had something to do with that. Before the pre-medicated Breda would have done 5 MBAs on a weekend. Okay? You know, I was so high. And remember, the person, if it is in fact bipolarness, the person who is medicated, and I found that you actually miss the highs. You miss the buzz. You miss the achievement. So that can happen too. Okay, that's a lot about that in the literature. The behaviours are the symptoms of an illness. They are not the person. Again, referring to my own experience, my husband said his skin is that thick now because I get very irritated, depression. I can say things that I am so ashamed of. He just says, okay, I'm long enough for this game, it doesn't go in. But it did in the beginning. Because I was the type of person, when I was in a manic state, I'd get very aggressive. No two ways about it. I was horrible. I was fighting the world. But with knowledge, I now, believe it or not, can even, on medication, can even stop my mouth shooting off at times. Because I know it's not coming from my feelings about him. I know it doesn't help the person receiving it, but just to know that. Sometimes there's no connection with you. They're talking about their own anger. Take care of yourself. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's true. Really take care of yourself. And take care of yourself not only in the nights going out and that. Set a boundary. Don't set a wall between you and the person, but set a boundary. Say, no, actually, I'm going to be reading for the next hour or two. No, I'm going to do a bit of gardening now. You have a right. You have rights. Just because your partner has depression or bipolar does not mean that you have to surrender your life. As I've repeated, you might need yourself one day, and they might need you one day. It's not get help. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything. The genetic basis for depression has been more and more research. In my own family, I can actually go through the generations. You know, there's 9 of us, there's 9 children. I was the only one that had the star illness of bipolar, but out of 9, there's 6 living with depression. Now, that could be Partly genetic, but partially behavioural and what we saw at home. But there is no one to blame about that, blame for that. So drop the blame. What did I do? Stop questioning yourself. Deal with the today. Learn about depression. As I said, I can't. Shine is another organisation, is very good. Educate yourself as to what's happening to the person you love. The more you know, the less fear you will have. I think when I said to my mother I had a diagnosis of bipolar, she was really frightened. She thought straight away I was going to be doing crazy things. But the more I talked to her, and she's a psychiatric nurse, she's 92. But she got an awful fright. I said, no, Mum, with lithium and with that, I can control this. Not 100% of the time. Believe me, I fall on my face enough. Offer love and support without trying to be directive. What I'm saying there is, you love the person, you offer them support, but stop telling them. Try to avoid telling them what to do. And the reason being, it should eventually come from them. And if they're in therapy or so, you would hope that this change would come from them. If not, you might need medication or whatever. If you go around giving person orders, you make a person feel like a child anyway. If they never had depression. Okay. Offer love and support. Well, we know that you wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't love and support them. Depression has the ability to just grow through a household and contaminate. Okay? And particularly with children. It's very hard to keep it in check. If you have your boundary, if you're taking your 2 nights out, if you educate yourself, you get a little bit of distance from it. With children, all I can say is age appropriate to younger children and discuss it pretty frankly with children over 16. Age appropriate, Does a 5-year-old need to know? No. But kids aren't stupid. They can feel tension in a household. You don't have to go into the big blurb of daddy's got bipolar. Man. No, you could say, do you know the way you break your leg and that and it gets better? Your brain, sometimes that can not work too well, and that's what's wrong with daddy at the moment, and so he has to rest a lot and that. Kids are very receptive. Forget the name. The name can come later, Break the cycle, and I refer back to that 2 or 3 page document on the Aware website where you look at the things you're doing and what effect, what cycle are you in? When I mean, are you feeding into this depression? Are you over-minding the person? Are you neglecting them yourself? Are you doing the thinking for them? Are you doing the washing for them? Are you doing the shopping for them? They might be depressed, but they can put on a lot of washing. I've managed to have 2 children. That's an unfair thing to say, but these practical things. I remember one very deep depression I was in. I baked bread. There was so much bread. It was unbelievable. Be tolerant of yourself. You have rights too. I think I've said that over and over again. Don't feel guilty if you want to go out for those 2 hours. Don't feel guilty about going to the cinema. You have a right to a life, and you will be better. You'll be more refreshed. Okay? You can't go back. Accept the change. Accept the change in your relationship. Accept the change in what's happening. It would have changed anyway. I can only say for myself, it has enriched my marriage at no end. Because there's a bond there that has lasted 27 years. We've killed each other, but there's an understanding. Also remember, they are also responsible for their illness. If they have an appointment with a therapist and there's a car and they can drive, and if they're not really ill, should you drive them? Do you always need to be there? Remember, like the batteries, like the Energizer batteries, and then when the crisis point comes and you really are needed, you haven't got it to give for yourself or for others. So that's a very, very important point. And reach out for support. Reach out. You would not take out your child's tonsils at home yourself. It's not a failing if you reach out for support. It's not that there's anything lacking. It's actually proactive. Okay. Now, and I'm just going to very quickly run to these slides. I'm just for yourselves to see the demands of caring. Caring can, outside of your job, is up to 36 hours a week. That's what the research is showing. So on top of your job, you're caring for 36 hours a week. Now, there is research that shows that carers of, or people supporting, are hidden patients. I don't like the term. But what they're talking about is if the carer doesn't mind themselves, they could become depressed as well. Okay? Coping. Very quickly through this. There's two types of coping you can use. Emotion-focused coping and problem-focused coping, right? Emotion-focused, problem-focused. I explained this by emotion-focused is about dealing with the emotions. It's dealing with how you feel, the rejection, the stress, okay? Problem-focused coping is doing something about the situation. If you find yourself only in this emotion-focused, you're kind of going in a circle, aren't you? Men are great at problem-focused, and that's what my research has shown. Okay? I was working with a young guy, and he said, tell me the difference between the two. I said, imagine you have to go to hospital, you're sick, okay? You have two different hospitals. You have the emotion-focused hospital and the problem-focused. The emotion-focused hospital go, you must be very sad you broke your leg, and you're there dying in pain. I was all talking about how terrible it is that you broke your leg. And you're there going, just give me the tablets. You go to the problem-focused hospital, they ain't going to spend much time talking to you, but they're going to fix your leg. So you use those differently. And it's just a good check for yourself. Am I just focusing on the emotions? Are there practical things I could do? No, I won't drive him. I will actually get out my diary, plan the 2 nights. Is that okay? Is people getting that? The difference between the two? Okay. It's just a good check for yourself. And the feeling of constant vigilance must be very difficult. It's like walking on eggshells. Every client I've worked with says it's like walking on eggshells. Out of 6 males that I interviewed for my research, 5 said it's like walking on eggshells. That's a very hard way to live. So that's why you really need to reach out for help. You really need to look after yourself. Go for a mindfulness course, do some yoga. Recover. Don't feel guilty about walking away. I can't repeat it. Someday you'll need yourself or they will need you. You don't want that battery to be empty. And you have a right to feel good. Expressed emotion, it's, if there's a lot of criticism in a household, it's not just criticism, but if you find something, oh, for God's sake, that can actually make the person worse. And vice versa. My message here is watch the communication. How are you communicating with each other? My hackles always go up and hear, you always, you never. Those 2 phrases. You always and you never. Okay. In a way, you're an informal part of the mental health team. And that's what you should see yourself as. You are. And there is an actual difference between how males and females care. In my own research, and from what I've read, males take more time out. Self-care. And they're right, by the way. There's the difference. The reality is your loved one might reject you, might push you away. These are the things, be hurtful, say awful things, pull down the entire mood of the house. These are symptoms of depression. It's not the person themselves, okay? So remember, that might be hard to keep in mind all the time, but these are symptoms of depression. And I just put a phrase there that might help. I was talking about the assertive I statements. I totally realised that you were not feeling well, but when you, blah, 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 you make me feel blah, 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 perhaps we can discuss it or have a chat about it when the kids go to bed. It just takes the heat out of the conversation, okay? It may begin to isolate you. You start to feel guilty. All of these things I've spoken about already. You can feel angry. That's okay too. Access your friends. And if you need to go and have a couple of hours of therapy for yourself, yeah, do that. You're working 36 hours plus a job. Guilt isn't going to get you anywhere. You might dread coming home. You may worry about the effects on your children and you're overburdened. All of these feelings are valid and are shared by a lot in the research I've read and the research I've done. So don't think it's just you that's feeling like that, okay? And these are the questions that you can ask yourself. Am I informed enough? Do I know enough? Am I afraid to know more? Do I really want to know? Okay. Am I seeking enough support? Am I trying to take this on myself? Am I engaging in self-care? Am I really looking after myself? Okay. And these are the things you can do. You know, you seek information from your GP, the relevant websites. The Aware lectures are an absolute, even though I'm doing one of them, is a fountain of information. I have found them. I've watched a lot of them. Look at those. There is the educating yourself. Knowledge is power. Insight. Understanding that suicide ideation doesn't always mean a suicide. You still have to be careful. But with insight. And my last phrase is taking time out to recharge. Okay. Now, my last couple of slides here, and I go through them quite quickly. I've talked about a lot of it here. Is my own research that I did. I did research on males, Irish men living with partners who were living with bipolar, so specifically bipolar. And the ages were 27 to 56, and Aware. I had 4 or 5 of my participants came from where it was very, very difficult to get anybody to talk about this. Interestingly enough, I got so many contacts from American men to do the interview. It was really interesting. They were absolutely bursting to talk, but not the Irish. I don't know if that's of significance, okay? Bipolar. As we know, it is a fluctuation in mood. You have your bipolar 1, where you get very, very manic, which is very disruptive, and down into the depression. Okay? And the depression in bipolar is actually very... It seems to stick harder. It seems to stick to your ribs. I can't remember what it was called in the research, but the bipolar... depression seems to just bring you lower, possibly by virtue of the fact that you've gone so high. Okay? Then you have your second type, your bipolar 2, where the highs aren't as big. But funnily enough, the lows remain as taxing in both. And then you have the cyclothymia, where somebody can cycle a number of times during the year, etc. I don't want it to turn into a psychology lecture anyway. This is something you can look at, but just be aware of the different types. Okay, be aware of what sort of medication. I'm always fascinated by people who say the doctor gave me tablets. What are the tablets? Just inform yourself. You don't have to take over the doctor's job, but just know. Like if your loved one was taken to the hospital in the morning, they'd say, "What medication is he on?" You say, "The pink one's from the doctor." You know, just inform yourself. These were the findings. Experience of burden. All 5 males had an experience of burden. And it was broken into objective and subjective burden. Objective being, you know, the day-to-day running of the home. Subjective is the emotional impact. Okay? So all 5 of them experienced that. The findings for what I call 2 sides of the same coin was riding the wave of the manic phase and the down phase. Coping. Adaptive and non-adaptive, look, it just says coping well or not coping well. Okay? And locating support, funnily enough, came out from these 5 men as very strong. Where do I get help? As one guy said to me, who do I pick up the phone to when it's 4 o'clock in the morning? You know, and I said, you could phone the smart things. He said, yeah, but I want to talk specifically about bipolar. I just thought it was interesting. He was quite animated about it. You know, where do I turn? The experience of burden, subjective burden, and I've actually spoken about all of this, was stress and tension, the constant vigilance that I spoke about, self-blaming, blaming yourself. Why isn't the person getting better? Am I not looking after him properly? Am I doing something wrong? Guilt and anger, secrecy. That was an issue that came up. Being told you can't tell anyone. Is that a fair ask? No, it's not. You have a right to tell your friends, your close friends, those you love and trust. It's not fair. And, you know, I have to share this with some people. I need some support. If it makes me angry, I'm sorry, but I need to share this. Okay? And the sense of loss, the loss as to the relationship you thought you would have, the loss as to these wonderful holidays you thought you were going to have. It's happened to us, and I've been very ill on them. You know? And the burden on the relation was the loss of trust, the loss of intimacy, insecurity, the desire for normality. When will it just be normal? When will an argument not spiral into, I just want normal? And the last one being in it together. And what was meant by that, we married for good and bad times, but being in together doesn't mean that you sacrifice yourself at the altar of the other person. Remember, on that flight, the mother puts the oxygen mask on first. Okay. And the manic and the depressive phases. In the manic phase was the aggression and the irritability that became a problem. That was surprising that the ladies in this were actually... I was surprised and relieved because I can get very aggressive. So it wasn't just me. Very hurtful phrases. They're lashing out. Relational hostility, unpredictability, tension, the stress, and the distance between them. It's frightening to see the person who you loved and had children with turn around and practically spit things into your face. Separate the person from the illness. It's really hard. If you can. Keep a journal, if it helps. Just write it down, get it out of your system. Burn it if you want. Keep a journal. And the coping. And very interestingly, all these males had sport. All 5. How they coped was that no matter how ill or stressed their partner was, they ran, they cycled, they just took the time every day. And as one guy said to me, that has kept me sane. That has kept me going. Another guy would hike up mountains. And a very interesting observation, one guy said to me, it took me 5 years to figure out that arguing with her in the manic phase was a waste of time. And I said, what do you do now? He says, I walk away, I tell her, I know you're feeling unwell, but when you get that aggressive, I can't engage with you. 5 years, he said. It took 5 years of screaming backwards and forwards, okay? So that was quite interesting. Non-adaptive coping, to withdraw from people, to avoid the situation, to avoid talking to anybody about it, to avoid even thinking about it yourself, okay? To overreact, but we're all only human, okay? And as I was talking about, the emotion focus, the hospital where they're saying, God, it must be awful to have a broken leg, and you're sitting there going, give me a tablet, okay? That's a nice check for yourself. If you're dealing with the emotions all the time, but not dealing with... What I mean practicalities are, am I taking time for myself? Have I planned time out? If this person has been very insulting, have I come back to them when they're feeling well and saying, when you spoke to me like that, I really felt hurt? Look after yourself. And this was very interesting one, and I get very fired up about this, is the location of support. Psychoeducation, fancy word for learning about the psychology of it. They wanted to know more. Some felt they just dropped the person at the door of the psychiatrist, nothing against psychiatrists, but they weren't told anything. You have to remember there's a confidentiality of the client as well. Okay, within reason. But they wanted to be included more. And I would say if you're setting up a plan to deal with it, you could actually include the psychiatrist and say, can I have your number? This is the plan we're putting together. Okay? You don't have a right to the intimate discussions. You have a right, to know about the illness, to know how he's doing, or he or she is doing, if your partner is in agreement with that, What I'm saying is don't be afraid to open your mouth. Say, what is this? What's this tablet for? Inform yourself. There was very much the feeling that there wasn't enough support for caregivers, in particular male caregivers. The feeling being that males didn't want to admit they couldn't cope. But they actually found it very difficult, so it felt as one guy said, it'd be great now if we had a cycling group and we could talk about it. I thought it's very typical. They wanted to cycle and talk about it. And there was an overriding feeling they were unaware of where to access support, they were unaware of even where to look, and they talked about non-professional support. What we mean there, non-psychiatrist, non-psychologist support. Even if you know other people who dealing with the same situation, form a support group. If you wait for everybody else to do it, what's going to happen? Nothing. And it doesn't have to be a room with 20 people, 3 or 4 people. Just get together once a month. How are you doing? Just connect with people. Again, the bottom line being, if you have a child who has depression, that is such a challenge. You still have to take time for yourself. The child still has to learn those limits. And they still have to learn that, you can't be abusive. You're not allowed to be abusive when you're drunk on a plane. So, these are sort of things I've been thinking about. So locating support came as the main. There was a lot of talk about it. And that's, in fact, my last slide. I hope it's been informative. I hope it's hope you've got you thinking a little bit. And my main thought is that to take care of yourself, to be good for you. Thank you. Thank you.